Hello, everyone. Jay Shalansky here from the Fifth Trooper Network. Before we start today's episode, just wanted to let you know about an exciting announcement for the Fifth Trooper Network. We are welcoming the list builder Legion HQ to our family. That's right, Legion HQ, the Legion list builder, is now part of the Fifth Trooper Network. We're really excited about the opportunities that this provides for you as players and being able to add this tool to our already extensive network of Legion tool sets and information. If you haven't used Legion HQ yet, I encourage you to check it out. You can go to our website or social media platforms to find the link. It's because of supporters like you that we can bring tools like Legion HQ to the Fifth Trooper Network. And I just wanted to take a second here and thank you for your support, thank you for listening, and thank you for playing Legion. Without further ado, here is episode 60.
Welcome to the Fifth Trooper Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Fifth Trooper Podcast. My name is Jay Shalansky, and joining me this week is not Evan. We let our little trash panda go travel the world, and so this week joining me is Brendan Franz.
Hey everybody. Man, I can't believe you let him out of the yard. Like, did he get his shots and everything?
Yeah, we made sure we gave him some snacks for the road. We gave him his shots. We're gonna miss our little trash panda, but he'll be back next week. Actually,
Well,
I think
maybe
he's out in California looking at Disneyland. So I think he's at he got to see Star Wars Land, which is cool.
Oh, that'll be fun. Man, I always feel like funny when people go to California and stuff because it's like you're only like 4 or 5 hours from me, but at the same time, like that's 4 or 5 hour drive. So it's like just far enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's even like that with people in California, right? Like I've been to California a number of times, and like I'll be in San Diego or something, and then like a friend of mine is in Sacramento, and he's like, "Oh, hey, you're coming to California? Where are you going?" I'm like, "San Diego." He's like, "Oh, never mind." So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's all good. But no, maybe so Star Wars Land and probably some other cool stories. That'll be some good content.
Yeah, so that'll be good for when he comes back. But in the meantime, we got the. I've decided that I don't care what they call you, that I'm gonna continue calling you the High Marshal. So
I
whatevs.
appreciate that. I'll
Yeah,
take it. Like I've always tried to like not like use the term myself, but I appreciate it and I'll take it.
yeah. Nobody can stop me on my podcast. I'll do what I want. But for those of you who don't know, if you're new, if this is your first episode you're listening to, or you're just catching up on episodes, or whatever the case may be, Brendan is basically our judge for every large FFG event around North America right now. Right? You've been to every major one since LVO last year, I think, for the most part, right?
Yeah, my Pokemon collection is unfortunately incomplete. Only with Nova though.
Oh, right,
And
right,
then
right.
so Nova was the only one that I didn't get to go to, which I was kind of bummed about. But schedules and let me tell you, I needed the time off anyway. Um, but and then I guess what I guess one of the things that maybe we don't have the broadcasting on is that we've actually got a number of other grand championships and stuff going on in like London and Australia, and all these events keep popping up on Discord. It's blowing my mind. Like we're actually getting international events going on.
Yeah, the last few weeks, well, maybe the last month or so, we've tried in the beginning of our podcast to list all events. First it was the RPQs and the Grand Championships, and now with the Primes, we're trying to, once they pop up with more, we're going to try to list them all, and so that everybody knows, it's a worldwide thing going on, right?
Yeah, I love it. And sure, there was some detractors who were like, man, year one was just the U.S. championships or whatever. And it's like, well, the game's got to grow, man. We gotta start somewhere, and we're doing
Yeah.
that now. We're getting qualifiers all over. I mean, I'm
Yeah, I mean,
excited for it.
yeah, and that happens, right? Like Sometimes when companies are based in a certain country, that their focus is in that country, and it's difficult sometimes to think internationally versus domestically. And I think they listened and they heard everybody kind of shout out about, hey, like this isn't a world championship. You didn't have any of us, and so I think FFG listened, and they're doing their best to make it more of a worldwide event.
Yeah, we'll see. And then I mean at the same time, like I'm curious to see how many people put their money where their mouth is, and they got those invites. Are they actually going to come to Chicago? Right. So
Yeah, that is
I'm
interesting.
excited for that. So
I mean, that's just interesting, just from a RPQ slash Prime Championship standpoint, right? Like, how many people locally in the U.S. are going to come to Chicago? Let alone, I think the likelihood of someone from London or Spain or Germany coming is greater than someone from, let's say, Arizona or Florida, maybe. You know what I
oh
mean?
yeah.
Like, so yeah, I think that's. I don't know why. I don't know why I think that in my head. I just feel like that if you won a grand championship or you won something in Germany, or like maybe this is means more for you to come all the way out versus if you just won a local championship, like, in Podunk, New York or whatever, like you may not make it all the way out. It's
Yeah.
just an interesting thought.
No, I could feel that. I mean, I lived in Omaha for for however many years, and was a war gamer then, and never went to Chicago for Adepticon. And I've got guys in Arizona who they are way more serious about their 40K than I ever was. And they've only ever been to LVO, and they've never been to Adepticon, and just because of the locality, right? Like they're just like, this is what's in my neighborhood, so this is what I'm going to go to. I tell you, it's a different experience. They're both big events, but they're totally different.
Oh, yeah, completely. Well, they're all like everyone, like Nova, Gen Con. Gen Con's a beast of its own, but PAX, like every event have some similarities, but there's tons of differences that make them unique and a pleasure to go to for the most part.
Yeah. And segueing that a little bit. So I know you went last year and were involved. Are you going to PAX again this year?
I've been back and forth about it. I'm leaning no, just because I saw somebody posted, and I don't know how, I don't know if this information is legit or not, but someone posted on the Facebook group that I think they're doing a Sunday Legion event, and I was just kind of like, man, no, thank you. Like that's a tough one, but I may try to hit it up because they had a great, like last year was kind of I believe it was one of the first events that really had Keyforge featured, and they were running some amazing Keyforge stuff, so that was fun, and I enjoyed PAX. I say though, like PAX, similarly to Nova, like if you're not playing games, there's not as much to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean that one's PAX Unplugged, right? So the
Yeah.
whole point is really revolved around gaming in general, which I mean PAX of any kind is still on my bucket list. I've never been. But PAX Unplugged, if I'm not mistaken, this is only like their third year or something like that. Third or
Yeah.
fourth or
Yeah, I think
um
they're really early on. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, they're doing what they can, and it's just interesting cuz like, Gen Con or even Adepticon, like there's a bunch of other stuff going on that you can kind of get involved with. And PAX, there was a little bit of that, but they're still growing. So
Yeah, no, it's cool. I love it, and I actually just I got Penny Arcade on the brain anyway for other things and other podcasts we can talk about. But yeah, I really enjoy what they're doing. And I was just curious because I know that we had Legion last year, so I wasn't sure if you were going. But it sounds like you're still on the fence for Warfare Weekend, which is the next one I'm going to.
yeah, we were talking about it here. Rachel and I are weighing our options. I definitely not so much to be part of the Grand Championship, even though I would absolutely sign up if we do end up going. It's more of just everyone that we know. A lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people that we know are going to be there, like War Corgi and R1H4 and yourself and Ed, and like there's just a ton of people that are going to go, and it's not too expensive to get out there from Syracuse, so it's something I'm still on the fence. I got a lot of stuff going on here at home on the home front that I got to work out before we make that decision. But yeah, I'm still fence riding that one as well. We're going at the end of this month. We're going to be at Kappa Cup, which is they got X-Wing Legion and Destiny tournaments going on, and that's in Pennsylvania. And that's a fun event, so we're gonna go there. We might end up doing some live streaming from there, and then pretty soon here, like in the next week or two, I got to figure out if I'm going to Warfare Weekend.
Well, that'll be awesome. No, we've had some really good community shout outs, and for anybody who doesn't know, Warfare Weekend is in St. Louis, November 8th through the 10th. Our actual events for Legion are on the 8th and the 9th, which is Friday, Saturday. And that is a grand championship. So that comes with everything. It's got the Sabine embossed cards. It's got the Sabine graffiti token, not just a graffiti token itself, but also the command tokens that are graffiti tokens. And then the Bosk poison tokens and all that fun stuff, plus 4 seats for Worlds on the line. And like you were saying on cost, I think the group rate hotel is like $99 a night. I don't know of another event in the US that has prices that low. And
yeah,
I mean, Vegas for LVO, Nova for Nova, which is Virginia area for anybody who doesn't know that term, but and then Canada, oh my gosh, like that was an amazing location, but that hotel was not cheap.
Well, it's funny, even for Northeast Open, I think we were at like $130 or so, or something on the hotel.
Yeah, even in Syracuse, New York, so this St. Louis event is just that much cheaper. And not to knock any of the other events, but that's just the location, right? So
yeah,
so cost of travel there is down. And then we're gonna see some people. We got some regular faces. Like I've never met War Corgi before. I'm totally excited to meet him. We were even debating whether or not the dog could actually even be allowed in the in the event space or not. But the question was asked. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I've got the terrain in my garage ready to ship out any day now.
Yeah. So with that being said, with that coming up and Vegas in January, have you been boning up on the rules there, High Judge? Because you got some splaining to do, I think, on the floor.
Yeah, we got some new ones, and we always do. And what's funny is like even as old as this game gets, I still get like real like how does force push work? Can you force push out of an engagement? I guess I still get questions like that. So yeah, it's a combination. Some
Brendan, can you force push out of an engagement?
No, RTFC. Read your friendly card. No, it's on the card. Card text overrules regular rules.
Does force push? What else? What does force push constitute as a movement?
It's a speed X move, which means that it's not a climb or a clamber or any of that fun stuff. It is simply a speed X move. So yeah, I mean, like all these rules, man. Like it's kind of funny because I'm always kind of brushing up on them, but then at the same time, like I just bring the rule book, man, and get real good at looking through it.
Right. finding the right stuff at the right time.
Yeah, it's a combination of skills there, and it's really just I'm not doing a 300 to 400 person card game tournament where I've got 6 other judges I can lean on. It's just me, man. like there's no backup. So
yeah, but in my experience at the events we've been together where I've seen you judge, the calls for the most part are pretty, once in a while you'll get a couple at the same time, but I found that there hasn't been a ton. There doesn't seem to be tons and tons and tons of judge calls where, like, at a Magic event that I've been to, it feels like there's judge calls like every 3 seconds. It just feels like in Legion, it's like maybe one every like 20 or 30 minutes, maybe one every hour or so.
Yeah, I'm gonna jinx myself here and say that I don't think I've ever seen three judge calls at the same time, but I've definitely had two, and that that gets a little bit awkward because you're trying to get everybody in and out as quick as possible. Because realistically, if they're calling for a judge, it's probably disrupting their game, and we all know how sacred game time is for everybody. So
Right.
trying to keep everybody on track, and then depending on the event, depending on the schedule, sometimes I'll issue, time extensions if I can, um, or event to event. I'm really trying to get away from doing hard dice down built into the schedule. I'm really trying to just build enough of a schedule that allows me to just say, you know what, we're gonna run this. We're gonna call time in the round, but then we're gonna push everybody to finish the round you're on as quickly as possible. And hopefully that's under 15 minutes anyway. Um,
Yeah, I'd say that, like, I've talked about this on the cast and
yeah.
other areas, but like that hard dice down in LVO when I was playing Nima was, man, that I think I could have had him, and there was a really good chance I would have, but you guys called the hard dice down, and it was like, okay, well, there goes that. And that's a real feels bad when that happens.
Yeah, and I don't even like doing it like as a judge, but it's just one of those when we're trying to get as many matches in a day and then get out and get to dinner and all that. Like it's a tough call one way or the other because you're looking at the resolution of realistically like one or two games compared to the other, what, maybe 28 or so that have already finished, so it's a feels bad for one or two, but we're getting everybody else back on track.
Yeah,
But
sure.
at the same time, you still want everybody to get the most game out of their game. So it, it's always a juggling match.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I don't envy your position there.
Yeah.
That's just, I was just given kind of that's the feels bad
Yeah.
moment of
Yeah. Yeah.
dice down. But I mean, I've had feels good moments of dice down, where I was on top, and maybe if my opponent had some more time, they could have maybe not completely won, but started to swing it the other way, and I'm like, ah, sorry, dice down. you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of a funny thing. I've seen it once or twice at least, where we're in time and I'm trying to get a match slip in and get a score recorded. And there's a great portion of the people who will look at a game state and say, "Yeah, there's no way I can win this. You've won it."
Yep.
And then there's another smaller portion of the people that, regardless of whether or not those actions and those activations are going to impact the end of the game, they still are going to play it out to the very last dice roll and the
Yeah.
very last action, even if it's move, and you weren't even close to getting into base contact with an objective or anything. And that to me is just kind of funny because I think it's a little bit of an awareness, but maybe also just they're probably just excited to be playing the game anyway. Um,
Well, and
but
sometimes,
like,
I mean, from my perspective on that, like,
yeah,
sometimes I feel like maybe I didn't see the win loss there, and I'm just like, oh, I think if I just do this, maybe I can, maybe I could shoot this unit and destroy them with this shot, and then, but realistically, the math is against me on that, right? But it's like in your head, you're so worked up and you're in the game that you're like, oh, I can do this, I can win this right here if I can just move and shoot here.
yeah, I just need to roll 6 damage on my Z6. It's perfect.
Yeah,
I've got this.
right. Well, if you're Evan, that absolutely happens, but anyone
Yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah. No, it's cool though, and I'm not knocking it. It's an interesting observation, and I think you're right too. Yeah, sometimes you're so down in the weeds you don't have the eagle eye perspective on what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I was just thinking back. I need to take more pictures during events.
Mm.
I had a pretty awesome scenario at Gen Con, and I don't know if I told you about this story or not. But I when I'm doing these events, I'm going around, I'm taking pictures. I'm trying to blast social media as much as I can, but you get busy and sometimes you just can't. So I'm taking pictures at Gen Con, and all of a sudden I get a judge call, and I come over and I see our good friend David Zelenka holding one of those pillars, right? But he's holding it sideways, and I'm like, okay, so they needed like a line of sight check here, and for whatever reason they thought it was a good idea to move the terrain around or tip it or whatever, and I'm like about ready to issue a warning for like, don't be touching my terrain, man. um, and then I get called over, and I go, hey guys, what's going on? Which is always, I always try to open that up, like, what's going on? Tell me what happened, and how do we get to, you need to call me over to the table. um, and just a nice open-ended question to kind of kick things off. And they apparently accidentally backhanded this pillar and like upended a squad or two that was like leaning on its edge.
Oh,
um,
yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, so we're talking about having to replace, like, I think it was like 2 units worth of dudes. And it was, the pillar, he's holding it in place because he wants to remember where the pillar was supposed to be, not because he was trying to tip it for any sort of line of sight. um and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I just have this momentary pause. Not 2 minutes earlier, not like less than 2 minutes earlier, I had taken a picture of the game state from the angle of like behind David, where I could see all of his miniatures along the edge of this pillar.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just I just looked at the guys and I'm like, guys, I just want you to step away from the table for a minute, take a breather. I'll probably give you a like 5-minute time extension, and I'm just gonna rebuild your game state. Like, I got this, man. Like, and sure enough, I used the picture, and then I showed it to both players and I said, here, does this match the picture? And they said, yep. And I'm like, cool, play on. Like, there you go. No warnings. Like, didn't need to, but
That's
just
funny.
not the judge call I was expecting, man.
But the judge call that we needed.
Yeah, it was good
So what
times.
okay, so let's talk about this. We got 2 new factions that are going to be on the table when you get to judging again. You're going to have Tons, hopefully Dewbacks, we'll see. For sure, we'll see. For sure, Shores. Maybe Operative Luke and Vader, maybe, if we're lucky. There's going to be a lot of stuff. What is the one thing as a judge that you're kind of dreading that you believe is going to have a lot of judge calls? And how can we mitigate that now?
That's a good one. I think there's some bookkeeping issues to deal with clones, and checking ranges, right? Like, clones and droids, really, like, the range between units is a lot. And so I think as people are moving around, you're going to have one of two things. You're going to have people who are moving really quickly and they don't measure, and then surprise, surprise, we're actually not within range to be sharing tokens or passing orders. And then I think realistically, from a bookkeeping perspective, you're going to have people spending tokens every time they're spending a clone token. So I think bookkeeping wise, that's kind of a pain in the butt, as people are making sure they have the right tokens and not spending too many aims or whatever. And then I think just the action economy for Tauntauns, just the fact that, move token, attack, stuff like that. And even throwing in a reposition in there too, so they've got some real efficiency, and just getting people used to, and displacement for Tauntauns. That one's, people running around and displacing people.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I had an interesting example of that the other day, where it displaced snow troopers, and you can go range 1, and so I ended up moving them in a more advantageous position where then I could then flame somebody on my next turn. And so I think that's going to become things that people need to be aware of is where it's not a speed 1 move, it's a range 1 move.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think that discussion is still kind of jury out on whether or not you can deploy a emplacement trooper, the mortars, on a
Oh,
different
yeah.
level,
Yeah.
vertical one. I don't think we've really come to a conclusion on that particular question. Um, I see the
So
arguments for
explain.
both sides.
So let's explain what that means for people who don't know.
Sure. So let me just go ahead and pull out uh, the rule for it.
Mm-hmm.
So detachment here says when deploying multiple units with the same detachment keyword, each unit must be deployed at speed 1 of a different friendly enemy unit leader. And it says during this deploy unit step of the setup, a unit with the detachment keyword must be placed at speed 1 of a unit leader from a friendly unit that has the same unit name or type specified in the detachment keyword. So what that says is if I'm putting down my shore troopers, I have to put down a mortar at speed 1 of that unit leader. So
Mm-hmm.
it's at speed 1. So it's not just within, it's not just it's not saying that the mortar has to be at a range. It's the movement template. And so the argument there is that it says at speed 1, which doesn't necessarily specify that you have to perform a speed 1 move to then place the miniature.
Right.
And so that's the argument that says, well, because I don't have to do that, the speed X rules don't apply. And I see that argument. I think it's kind of weak. That's just my honest opinion of the matter.
Okay.
Because realistically, if we're using that speed template, um, and I don't even know that my own defense of this is the best, but honestly, I feel like if you're using the speed template, that it should be, and just this idea that they have to be deployed together. It feels like, and I'm using bad words there, right? Like that's not how you justify a rule. You don't justify a rule with feelings. But if we're going to use that speed template, that we should be applying the speed X rules. Otherwise, aside from the mechanical distance, I don't feel that using the range stick is the right, like we'd be using the range stick otherwise.
Yeah.
And then it would be deploy it within, right?
Right.
Because and I bet that range is actually pretty similar. Like when you, by the time you get the width of that base down, like it's probably pretty close.
Yeah, and I would almost make, I think I think the real argument comes in when you're doing like range 2. So like for
Mm-hmm.
instance, folks at home, like where this is advantageous is, let's say I have recon intel on my shore troopers, or maybe, you're on advanced positions with recon intel. That's crazy. That's crazy good. But basically what you do is you deploy your shores, you move them up to like near a building, and then you can deploy the mortar trooper up on top of the building, as long as it's speed 1 from speed 1 as a distance measurement from the shore trooper leader. And so the question comes in is like, okay, if it's a range 1, well, that could be a climb move, right? Or a clamber, so that's reasonable, maybe. But then the problem is, if it's range 2, it's like, well, that's getting crazy. If you put them up on like a range 2 mountain or something.
Yeah, that'd be, and you could have any number of height difference there with regard to if you're just using a range stick. And I think that's why there's a movement stick instead. But honestly, I don't know. And so I'm hoping that we get some feedback on it. It's one of those ones where I'm hoping, like right before LVO, we got some minor clarifications on some rules.
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe we see a forum post like that, if we've shouted from the right mountains, because I know they watch a lot of our discussions, whether it's Facebook or Discord or whatever. and they get that feedback. So, I'm hoping we see something, but at the same time, like worst case scenario, I'll make a decision if I have to. But I also think that the number of situations where you're going to see something like that come up is probably not that big.
Yeah, I think more
You
of the
know,
ones that are going to come up are like using if Vader's new card is available, his new command cards for the operative Vader, the one that allows you to force push. Oh, basically, it's a force push, but move a unit within range, range one from Vader can move another range one, and you can, and up a range as well. That's going to be interesting with like with uh what's some tauntauns there, because then that does that give them a dodge? Like I think those types of questions are going to pop up a lot.
yeah, I've been getting a lot of like force push and standby and other things like that questions too recently, which is interesting.
Yeah, one of the standby questions that I talked to you about was, okay, let's say, how does standby work, as far as like if I have, let's say, my death troopers have a standby and then Vader force pushes an enemy unit within the standby, does that trigger standby for the death troopers?
Yeah, I mean it should. They're performing a move action, and or they're performing a move, and they are within range, so you should be able to do it. And so I think my original perspective on the question you gave me was like, well, Vader has a standby, so like Vader standbys as his second action, and then decides to use force push. Well, now Vader's done something else besides his standby. So he's going to lose his standby before the end of the resolution of that force push. So you're not going to be able
Right, and
to.
that's because Vader, even though it's free, it's still an action, and actions take away standby.
Exactly. So, but yeah, no, if you're throwing people around and doing that, then you're good. The one thing that I kind of want to look at is just that new command card. I think it's awesome. It's what I wanted force push to be from the beginning. Like I would love if you could force push somebody and force them to clamber and roll dice. I think that would be just awesome. And it would make the guys who can climb for free even that much better, right? Because that's kind of an
Yeah.
unintended interaction. But like realistically, if you don't have to roll dice when climbing, you don't have to roll dice when climbing. Um, so that would be kind of a neat little quiet buff to everybody there. But unfortunately, that's even me, man. Like the rules don't always work the way I want them to.
Right.
So that's fun.
So, all right. So we talked about judging. Now, let me
Mhm.
ask you this. This is a hard hitting question.
Ooh, I
Are
like
you
hard
ready?
hitting questions.
Okay. What faction do you want to play, Brendan? What's
Droids,
your faction?
droids, hands down, droids.
Follow up to my hard hitting question. Will you ever actually play at an event
Ooh,
versus judging it?
ooh. Are we talking about like a side game, or are we talking like
No,
actually in the event?
actually enter an event and
Oh
play.
man. Maybe there's a future where I'm not judging an event and I actually get a chance to compete. They kicked me out of the booth on Sunday at Gen Con so that I would actually take some time off. I think I told this story already, but yeah, no, I don't know. Like it's funny. Um I don't play first person shooters, and I don't, not really, like sometimes I do, but uh there's a level of competition in me that I don't like riling up. And I prefer to just kind of sit back and give other people a place to have a good time. I get really into it. So I competed in a Rally Point qualifier in Prescott, right when the Rally Point qualifiers were kind of first kicking off. And Nathan and I had the worst game ever, like possibly ever. Like both of us left that game having a bad time at one point or another. And I just don't. I don't know. I don't like the butterflies in the stomach. I don't like the uncertainty. I don't like the um, who am I going to get paired up? Oh, I'm real nervous about who I'm going to get paired up or whatever. And I don't know, I get into it a little bit too much, and then I just rather sit back and everybody have a good time, and I'm much more relaxed, even though I'm not relaxed when I'm running events.
Yeah. Huh, that's interesting. So you're a droid player who's never going to play. How can we trust you, Brendan? How can
Oh,
we
I
trust
know.
you as a judge?
I know, right? No, I play locally. I do. I play locally. I've been on kind of a hiatus sabbatical recently. And honestly, I'm just waiting for droids. Like I could go and build a list. I think if I was going to play an Empire list right now, I'd run like Matt Fadling's list from Canada with like a tank and an E-Web and 2 speeder bikes, and just run something just completely fun. Um, but yeah, other than that, I'll whip anybody left or right with 3 Clone Wars starter sets. Bring it on. I'll run my droids. You can run whatever you want, and I'll win. It'll be fine.
Okay.
So yeah,
All Ion.
yeah,
Just
yeah, right.
everything Ion.
Hey, if you're that heavily invested in Ion, then you probably deserve to win. But
Yeah.
realistically, I don't see you bringing that to a that was always how I was brought up into wargaming, is like, you build your list before you know what you're playing. And then play like you're gonna run against any armory. Like, don't go, oh, I'm gonna play against Dark Eldar, so I need to bring this. That was never something I was taught to do.
Yeah, well, that's, and that's something we talk about a lot on the podcast, is trying to put together like all comers lists and figure
Yeah.
out, and it's becoming harder and harder, right? When it was just 2 factions and limited releases, it's like, oh yeah, I can absolutely build an all comers list. My biggest problem is going to be snipers and force users, right? So I can build around
Yeah.
that. Well, now it's snipers, force users, tauntauns, mortars, tanks, and then clones pretty soon, operatives. It's getting great, like, in a
And
good,
that's
it's
actually Kingsley and I had a real late night discussion the other night, about like balancing maps and things like that too. And it's always one of those, I'm always really hypercritical of my own. Like, did I lay out the tables well today? Did I build something that was playable? And privately having a conversation with Kingsley, he's like, no, you usually build pretty good maps and stuff. So like, I appreciate feedback from people when that happens, and even then, like, he'll be the first one to tell me, oh, this one particular map you did was terrible, it was horrible. He's the first one to say that. But that feedback I use that between events, because I mean, in a lot of cases I use the same terrain, but I'm always trying to like mix it up. So even if you've been to a couple of these events, it's not going to be the same layout. And I build it as I pull it out of the box. Like, I don't really have layouts built beforehand, and I can't do that with 34 tables, or 48 that we're going to have at LBO. It's impossible. But building a list that's good on all tables, right? And I took some honest criticism from our good friend Dustin Four and Deco Puma, who had a terrible time on John's Mustafar table with ATRTs. And so he had it was miserable, like really bad time. And so I take feedback like that, and there's a balance between how I build the tables and how you build your list. And I try to make it so that it's not going to be completely unplayable. Because I don't want everybody to have a perfect time on every list. Like, if you run all snipers, I don't want you to have a perfect time on every table. But you should have a good time on some tables. And I feel like that statement should be able to be applied to every table that I build, like, as a sum. You're not gonna have a perfect game on every table, but chances are there's a table that you'll have a perfect game on. And I like to build that way, and that's why we randomize table locations. But building a list that's good everywhere, like, what if that objective ends up way on the other side of the board? Do you have units that can get to the other side of the board quickly, or are you just going to write that objective off and have to build a different strategy around it? Whatever your answer is, you need to build an answer for that. So
Yeah.
kind of a little bit rambly there, but like that's one of the design things that I keep in mind on my end.
Well, and it's, that you bringing this up is something, a topic I want to talk about too, was that I think too, we're getting to this point where we have these terrain makers out there who, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, are artists, right? And so they're building these terrain pieces, these tables that are actually, can be considered works of art at some point, and trying to find the middle ground between terrain and art. And we've been clamoring and like asking for these like themed tables, right? And these themed terrain and all this stuff. Well, I mean, with that comes some art, and if you want the table to look amazing, you may have to sacrifice a little bit from playability, and vice versa, right? Like if it's super playable, it may not be as artsy, and it may not be as beautiful as it potentially could be. And so really trying to understand the difference between the two, and a couple, I think some other things that fly into that is like their value, money wise, and then their value from a gaming perspective and a community perspective.
Yeah, everything you said is 100% true. And we saw that at Adepticon, and we even saw that at NEO when we were running your event in Syracuse there. And so here we had what the toy box map, right?
Yeah.
Didn't cost a lot of money. I mean, I think there were maybe some lollipops exchanged for rental fees, but you know, but that table was amazing. I got generally good feedback on playing on it. But and granted, that one really achieved its visual theme, but like it wasn't this big grand scenic, you know, no hills. It was relatively flat. Um, type of map. And then we've got these other ones like, like some of the tables we saw at Worlds, like some of the competition tables we saw. Those competition tables we saw at Adepticon in particular were just gorgeous. And we had so many submissions, and we were able to only accept a handful of them. But like some of those tables were gorgeous, and then at the same time, just like you said, like we got some feedback that there were playability issues on some of them. And so it's that balance of like, casual competitive is the term that FFG has used, and I keep repeating because I try and remember, like, this is not an Ard boys, we're going to bring our nastiest unpainted armies that just roll the most dice. Like, this is casual competitive. We want to have we want to have people who have never played in an event before come and have a good time. And I think we definitely, I know we achieved that at Northeast Open, but I feel like we've achieved that everywhere else as well, of trying to cater to both the casual players and the competitive players. And part of that is the terrain,
Yeah.
I tell people I don't build StarCraft maps, and having both pretty and playable, and we had a little bit of that struggle, I think, even at Adepticon with a number of tables of like, yeah, this is a really cool piece, but it's too big,
Yeah. And I think the thing is too, you're trying to strike another balance there, which is when we have war games in particular take up a lot of space, right, at events. And with that comes kind of focus from a somebody watching, right? So you have all these other people that are walking back and forth throughout the hall and like going other places, but then you have these huge games that the spectators are watching. And so I think part of it too comes that, hey, if we have these beautiful tables that are on theme, then people are going to get excited and maybe get into the game, and then we can build the game more that way as well.
Absolutely. And that is one of the biggest reasons that I'm even talking to you right now, is like I knew what I could bring to the table, and what my local community had to provide for table terrain, because it's not my terrain. Like it's not mine. I'm fortunate enough to have somebody in my community who lets me borrow. Um, the majority of it comes from one person, but then there's about 4 or 5 others, Bushmen and a couple of my other locals included, who let me use all that terrain. And so I knew what we were able to bring to the Legion community, and I knew that we could bring this visually stunning impact to the game, that I feel like was a little bit missing before I got involved. I mean, I know there were plenty of other local communities that were doing just as good a job, but I stepped up with the availability to travel and bring this to big events. Is really, I guess, maybe the only difference there. Um, and then at the same time, reach out to those local communities. Like I'm going to St. Louis here. I have reached out to War Corgi and other locals to help support the event with terrain. So even then, it's not going to be all my stuff. All that amazing terrain that we had in Canada, none of that was mine. That was all between Luke Cook and I believe it was a goblin. Hooded Goblin was one of the stores nearby who donated their terrain for us to play with in Canada. So the community as a whole has accepted and kind of set the standard that we want to have awesome terrain for our game. And so we have to balance that with, we have to have awesome terrain, but it also has to be playable. And
Yeah, and I mean,
that's
like,
just a constantly tipping scale.
yeah, and something I think that we're gonna have to think about more, probably coming up, especially with some of the releases for clones and droids in January or February, whenever the tanks come out, is just like understanding that vehicles are probably going to start becoming a little bit more prevalent now. With ATST point reduction, tanks are good. The 2 new tanks for the new factions coming up in 2020, like, so that's going to have to be something that I think we were kind of forgetting for a little bit. Like we were putting that aside because uh, uh, yeah, just because the tanks and the ATST and the airspeeder weren't really being played. So now we just need to be a little bit more aware of vehicles as well. And maybe the vehicle can't get to everywhere on the board, but they need to get to some places on the board, or at least have fire lanes where they could shoot, into places on the board as well.
Absolutely. When I was working with, I had the pleasure of being able to say I helped build the world's table with Luke Eddy and Alex Davey, which is pretty cool because getting their ideas of like what does a good setup look like, right? Um, and then also like giving the feedback from both the people on the audio visual team who are trying to figure out what looks good on a stream, and then also getting the feedback from the people watching the stream on what they thought of the table layouts. We did not have to build for vehicles at Worlds,
Right.
because nobody had vehicles. There's not a single vehicle in any list in the top 8, and now I think there's a real possibility that'll be just like you said. It's going to happen more. One thing I like to do, and I don't know if other people do this too or not, I actually like to take like an ATST and just like pretend path it through my tables, if I can, and spend some time doing that and being like, okay, there's actually enough gap here,
Yeah.
and run that through. The tank has a weird shape, but I feel like it's more maneuverable. So I actually don't worry about the tank as much. I like to give at least enough time or enough space to pivot, at least in a couple places. But if you're running that through threading the needle Han Solo style, thread the needle Han Solo style. But you know what I'm talking about in the
Yeah,
movie,
I
right?
know. Yeah, I'm with you.
Like when he's threading the needle.
Uh-huh,
So,
uh-huh.
but yeah, it's definitely a concern, and I'm excited for it. At the same time, like uh, Matt had one of the objectives on one of his final boards was a flat like texture piece for like a key position or whatever. Um, and he just ran his tank over it and sat on top of it. And he's like, is there any way for my opponent to claim this objective? And I'm like, yeah, if they blow your tank up. Like, that was kind of an unintended result, and I don't think that he's going to be able to get away with that, on every board. But like, it was darn good use of the rules as written, in that particular
Yeah,
scenario.
well, and that's the interesting thing with that in particular is that they came out with that expansion set that turned those pieces into terrain pieces, and that's still confusing to people where it's like, wait, is this terrain? Does this provide cover? And you're like, no, it's supposed to be a flat marker, and
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. Or trying to tuck it under a tree, and like a low pine
right,
tree or something, and they're like, "Oh, well, the token doesn't fit." And I'm like, "That's not a token. That's a 3D piece. You need to use the physical
right.
token." Um, and that's yeah, I've definitely had that conversation with people, and be like, it's just a representation. The actual thickness of that is cardboard. Um, and then of course, Jay, I don't know like your personal feelings, but like, there's a subset of the community that feels that you should be able to place all 5 objectives if there's 5 objectives, or all 3 objectives if there's 3. And I honestly disagree with that. The rules say to do it, and then if you can't do it, here's what you do, or you don't place it if you're not able to. So the rules have already said you won't necessarily be able to place them in all scenarios.
Right.
And so I think, for better for worse, the game doesn't care whether or not you can place it or not. And so if you walk over to that table and perhaps you do something that creates that scenario, now you've made an active decision. So I think forcing players to, do something, or forcing table layouts to be a certain way because you expect it to be that way. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I also respect the people who disagree with me on that. Like, I don't think their point is invalid.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's just so many questions that pop up for scenarios that maybe no one's seen before necessarily. So it's interesting when unique questions come up like that. When somebody new sees the rules or reads the rules a certain way, and you're just like, oh, well, yeah, I guess.
Every single event that I go to, man, like, I can't think of an event that I have not had just an oh wow moment of, I'm gonna need to look that up. And it happens. There's always something that you're just like, I've never seen that happen. I made it all the way to Adepticon, and I had never seen someone, No Time for Sorrows, move Leia and then now be in range of a new target that she previously wasn't, and then issue an order to that person. I'd never seen that until I was at Adepticon, and that's just part of what you see at your own local stuff versus what you see when you get to travel. Because you're right, everybody has different eyes and perspectives on things. And that's why I do, like, I take feedback real serious, because I have my opinions and they're not all right, but get that other opinion in there and make the best decision we can.
Yeah, and it's just interesting, right? Like, all of that's interesting, and from a player perspective out there, and we've said this a million times before, but if there's ever a question or ever just something that you're just not sure about, just ask for a judge. It just even if you want to just tell your opponent real quick, be like, you know what, this is confusing me. I'm not sure about this. Can we just get a judge call on it? And because there's a lot of complex and nuanced situations that, even Brendan hasn't come up against before, and he'll make a call on the floor the best that he can. And then you don't have to worry about you or your opponent making that call, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I try to not get involved in games unless I need to. But I mean, it's like you said, like, oh, there's maybe judge call once an hour or whatever. Like, I'm standing by ready to help out. That's why I'm traveling, and why I'm doing it. And so, yeah, I'm always, you never know what you're going to get, right? and you're going to walk over, and it could be just a quick reminder about a keyword, or it could be deconstructing a bomb before you know, and just trying to figure out like what on earth do we do to resolve this. You know, and maybe, Jay, did I ever tell you about the Keyforge incident?
I don't know.
Did we ever talk about
Maybe.
that?
What?
We were gonna talk about it. So we were talking about great judge calls, right? So at Canada, and I don't know any of the people involved with this other than the judge and the FFG people who got involved. But there was a judge call, and in Keyforge, chain is a mechanic when you use a really powerful card that reduces your draw limit, because at the end of every turn you drop to your hand size, right? So if your hand size is 6, you drop to 6, but if you have a chain that says you have -1, you only draw to 5, right? So we've established that. For like 3 turns, this person had forgotten their chain, and they had drawn 3 extra cards. So just jumping back in history here, the very first penalty I ever gave was to a national champion for drawing a single extra card in World of Warcraft TCG. National champion drew an extra card, immediate game loss. And they had to start game 2, and then he apparently won game 2 and game 3. So, you know, just proved that he needed to win it anyway. But the floor rules doc that just came out actually only really is a hard warning or even a regular warning for drawing extra cards. And the resolution, if you're not able to determine what the cards were that were drawn, is you show your hand to your opponent, and they get to pick which cards to discard. And so from a judge perspective, Jay, this was an incredible scenario for me. I just get giddy when a situation comes along, not because I want to give anybody a penalty. Like, the guy who did this, flat out, his words felt like he should be disqualified, and disqualified is probably way too heavy-handed for this scenario. But this was such a cool scenario because, like, how do you resolve that? How do you fix 3 turns of extra cards? You know, what kind of a penalty do you issue? And those are the kinds of questions that I used to get as a card judge. And it was meant to make all the judges better. And we had this gal who, she would just go around and ask questions like that all the time, and just to keep people on their toes, keep their edge sharp. And so the question then becomes like, Jay, what would you do to resolve that? Like, how would you fix that situation with what you know?
Interesting. I guess I would have him, based on what you just said, I would have him show his hand to his opponent, and his opponent gets to pick 3 cards out of there and discard them.
So then what would you do for the chain?
I would then give him probably a couple more chains to even it up for another round or 2.
So would you keep the chain where it is? Would you reduce it to where it should be? Or
I would increase it by, depending on where it was, because, you know, with chains, once you reach a certain, it increases the number of cards. So it's by round, and then once, I think, what is it, 6? If it's 6 chains, it's 1 card for 6 rounds. If it's 7 chains, then it's 2 cards for the first round, and then 1 card after that. So it's like a ladder that goes up, or I forgot the exact number, but it's a ladder that goes up. So sure. If it was somewhere in the like 1 to 2 chain range, I'd probably give him 1 or 2 more. If he was up towards the 6 chain range, I wouldn't push him to the second level. I would have it stay where it was.
Okay. And then what would you do penalty wise? Because I should remind you, by the way, chains are a mandatory trigger, which does mean that both players are responsible for remembering it.
Oh, that's interesting too. Yeah, I guess the penalty would have been showing his hand and having his opponent be able to pick out the cards and discard them, and then giving him a warning.
Okay. Just a regular warning, like a 1 point?
Yeah. Well, because like you just said, if it's both opponents that are supposed to watch that, then they both failed at their job.
Right.
So
just like bounty for a bounty hunter, which is a mandatory.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can't just punish the player who had the chains, right, and you can't just punish the other guy, so I think you just give them both a warning then, and you just say, hey, you should have been watching this. Hey, you should have been watching this. Here's your warning. Chains either go up or down depending on how egregious and where their chains are. And then you show your hand and he gets to pick 3 to discard.
Seems good. So you're real close to what they actually did. So
Oh,
yeah,
boom.
yeah. And so again, this is always subjective, and those floor rules, I like to remind everybody, they are written the way they are, but it is very much with the caveat that is TO discretion. And I think Jay, for the most part, maybe I would feel the chain increase would be a little heavy handed personally. And again, I'm not a hardcore Keyforge judge or anything, but I feel like that would be a little heavy handed. But otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. You need to show your hand. You need to discard 3. The rule on the field was that the chain was going to stay in place and start reducing from that point on, because your chain does reduce every turn. So there could be an argument for reducing it to where it should be, because that is getting the game state to where it is supposed to be. So I could see that argument. I don't think it was wrong for them to keep it where it was. I kind of felt like you should almost go with a hard warning, which is I think a 2-point warning for each player, because I'm mean like that. But I think they ended up going with a hard warning for the player playing the cards, and then a regular warning for the other opponent, for the guy on the other side of the
Yeah,
table.
I guess the only reason I was thinking of increasing chains, just because in Keyforge, those 3 cards that he got, I mean, they could have changed the game. They could have, he could have ended up getting a key and forging a key within those 3 turns. And so that could have put his opponent behind. And so, I guess I would have, that's why I would have increased chains, because now we need to even up the state. Because I don't know what you got in those 3 cards, but if it changed the game state even further than just getting 3 extra cards, then we need to set it right.
Yeah. And I think I do think though that discarding all 3 the way they did is not only fair, but in Keyforge, with again the fact that you draw up to your hand every turn, your card draw is not just like a static 1 like you would in Magic or most other games like Pokemon. So the fact that losing cards just means you're going to cycle your deck more, it's not that strong of a punishment, so it could be,
Right, because those cards are going to go back in your deck. Those, and so that was kind of why I was thinking about messing with the chains a little bit too, and be like, let's give them a couple more.
And so I mean, that again, that's just all subjective, right? So like just now we've said 3 different resolutions, right? Like I would have been a little heavier handed on the warnings, but otherwise pretty much done what they did. You would have increased the chain, and that's just the difference in TO styles, right? At the end of the day, ultimately the goal though is to get everybody back to playing and get everybody back to non-disruption to the game state. I really loved that scenario just for what it represented, because it got all my gears turning, and it was exciting, and I think the judge made the right call at the end of the day. I support what they did. So
I mean, I don't think, like you said, there was a bunch of different scenarios, so there's not necessarily a wrong call. It's just at what level are you going to come in on that, and I think it's similar to what we faced at Adepticon when you came on stream. When it was Nathan, so, gave his opponent the wrong list and had a completely different army on the table than what he supplied to his opponent and to us, the streamers.
And actually, just for anybody on the recoup there, he actually had the correct list that he showed to his opponent, but he had a different list that was submitted to the TO. So what he
that's what it was. Yeah.
So the submitted list to the TO table was one of his opponents from the day before. And then he actually had the correct army list to show to his opponent, and that was one of the key deciding factors on where that penalty was going to fall, because ultimately his opponent had been provided all the correct information. It was just a documentation error,
Right.
for round one first
And
thing
I
in the
think
morning.
everybody who was watching the stream really appreciated you. So, for those who didn't know, Brendan came on and basically talked through the thought process just like what we did, but live, and was like, okay, well, we probably need to DQ him. And then it came back and you were like, well, okay, no, he gave the right list to his opponent. He just accidentally submitted the wrong list to TO. So maybe we give him a game loss. And then it was like, well, now that I've thought about it, it's not as egregious as I think it was because it wasn't on purpose. We tracked down whose list it was, where the problem happened. So it was just a mistake. So now it's just a warning. You know what I mean? Like it was just this, and it was good to hear the thought process on you, that the high judge, like going, okay, here's my initial reaction. After investigating, here's where I came. And then after investigating more and following up on some leads, here's where I really fell in.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, not all situations can I talk about so freely, but like on the things where I can talk about it, or if somebody has a question, or wants to talk about it afterwards, like I always want to debrief, and I always want to talk, and like, did you think that was right? Did you think that was wrong? What could I have done better?
Right.
Like, I'm not a perfect dude, and I make mistakes, but I do put a lot of effort into trying to not make mistakes when it comes to judge calls. There's just me. I don't have a backup. And some events I'm lucky, and maybe I got Peter, the guy who wrote the floor rules doc, or I've got Luke Eddy hanging out in the wings watching the games at Worlds or something, and Alex Davey on stream, and so we get a real weird one, and I go, hey guys, what about this? And they go, oh, even the guys who develop the game go, we've never encountered that. That's weird. And so I do what I can to avoid it, and still, like, if somebody has a problem, like, I'd much rather hear it from them direct than rumor go around, oh, Brendan made a mistake. Like, I'd rather address it and nip it in the bud and be like, oh, you know what, I freaking did screw that up. But
Yeah, and I would guess though, like most of the time it's not mistakes, it's more of how you viewed the rules as written.
yeah,
Versus how someone else viewed the rules as written, and
sure.
how you both in the same situation could see them. You see both sides, but you're like, okay, but I'm the judge, and this is how I understand it, so this is what I'm gonna go with.
Sure. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't talk about some of the situations I don't, is because in order to give a clear picture about what's going on, I would have to divulge information that's not public information, and stuff like that. And that's just avoiding conversations that would get awkward just because of removed information. Like, I don't want to spread any misinformation.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and so it's just easier to not talk about stuff. But on the Nathan thing, right? Like, it was just a weird thing that popped up. We can talk about that. I can talk about the guys at Gen Con, tipping over the pillar or whatever by accident, and hey, look, I was able to fix it. I mean, we can talk about things like that, because that's, nobody's going to be potentially damaged by it. It's just kind of funny, and um, everybody was such a good sport, especially with the terrain one. That was just hilarious. We all had a good laugh, man. Like,
Yeah, well, and
because
that's most. Go ahead.
otherwise, how would you fix it?
Right. Well, and I think most of the time things are easily contained and repaired, and those are the good times. And once in a very you know wild chance do we end up having an irreparable difference that no one can get along and move on from.
Yeah, and when those scenarios come up, eventually I just have to be a little direct, and I change my tone. And
Sure.
and it goes from, hey guys, what's going on, to, okay, listen up, I need you to do this.
Here's where we're at, boys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
um,
But
and I try to avoid that as much as I can, but that's the
mhm.
nature of the beast, and it's the day you don't ever want to happen. But when it does, you put your hat on and you pull your pants up and you just do it. You deal with it. So,
All right. Well, listen, I think we're going to wrap it up here.
cool.
Yeah, anything, any other nuggets of wisdom you want to bestow upon our podcast here, Brendan?
Nah, just be good to each other. We obviously we're in kind of a drought right now for content and new toys, but that'll be changing soon. Definitely be sure to check out Warfare Weekend and stuff. But other than that, just be good to each other, treat each other right, and enjoy the community. Don't be toxic, and just help each other out, and remember that we're all in the same boat because we all like Star Wars. So
that is true, and games.
Games and Star Wars, and just be just be cool, and hopefully we'll see you down the road.
All right, well, thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next week.
Join us next week for another edition of the Fifth Trooper podcast.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.